Hi guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we've got a very special guest, Franco Contiero. Welcome to the podcast, mate. Franco is a friend, colleague, member at WIT Training and runs a very successful physiotherapy and osteopathy clinic and is sort of one of the go-to people that WIT members will see if they pick up any niggle or injury. He also is a fellow of the Gray Institute, which has a lot of overlap with Red Pill training, which is one of the things we bonded over very early on. I think even the first day he came into WIT, we got talking about it and realised we spoke the same language in terms of biomechanics and movement assessments. And tell us the rest of your credentials, Franco. Like, how did you get into
the rest of my credentials?
What's your origin story?
I started as far from sport therapy as possible, in the sense that I started as a neurological physio, and I worked mainly in neurology department, and that was really my upbringing from a bachelor degree and physiotherapy perspective. And then I decided to move to the UK to do a master in osteopathy. And I still had in my mind not wanting to end up doing sport therapy. I don't really understand why. I think it was because everybody wanted to do it. And I was really sporty myself, but I just didn't see or didn't feel it was right for me. And then actually over the years being here a little bit in different environment I found myself in, I started working more and more with athletes, and I started enjoying trying the different sports they were going through and trying the different. So I picked up. I had a lot of patients coming from endurance backgrounds, so I picked up a lot of cycling and a lot of running. Did a few marathons, and then after a few years, I started getting involved in CrossFit, and I think initially a colleague of mine from the Gray Institute, actually, after I qualified from the States there, he took me to a class, and I really enjoyed it, and I started seeing some people from it, and I really enjoyed how well it fit within my philosophy of clinical practice, and the fact that CrossFit is all about, or at least I saw it as all about being able to adapt it to the single athlete. You have these goals of performance, but obviously you can adapt it for everybody. And that's kind of the principle that that in particular the Gray Institute and with the physiotherapy and osteopathy, we try to adapt the treatment plan, we try to adapt the management to the single person. So I saw it very, very similar to the sport of CrossFit.
Great, yeah. And so how long have you been training CrossFit? You've been going quite a while, hey?
Actually not that so less than a lot of you guys. I think I started in 2016. Yes, I started doing it, and I always did a little bit of like CrossFit ish type of training before. So I've always went to the gym, and I've always trained the circuit type of training and high intensity, but I really enjoyed the performance style of CrossFit, like the fact that you have these movements that you are trying to get you're trying to get good at. That's always been very appealing since the beginning. Yeah,
it's a real clear, like steady progression, isn't it? That especially this is again one of the things that really drew me into CrossFit. How when it started like with bodybuilding and stuff, that's obviously based on someone else's opinion. Powerlifting is based on if you can lift it or not, but it's just the three movements. Whereas CrossFit started to then open up and say, cool, okay, one, okay, yeah, you can look good doing it. Two, you can move heavy stuff. And three, you can move in a way that most people can't move. So it's that like superhuman style looking training, which obviously, it's when you're looking at some of these movements that are coming out, and it's so impressive at how quickly as an athlete you can adapt. And you can, as you say, it's like you're learning. So there's a scale option for pretty much everyone. So you might not be able to do the ring muscle up yet, but you might be able to say a bar muscle up. So then you do the bar muscle up as your option, but then you're learning the foundational movements to get you to the ring muscle up. So it's it's a real nice performance-based style of training that is really clear cut.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I also always enjoyed the fact that the CrossFit is, like, even for myself, I didn't realize how much CrossFit is a strategy game, and is you do need to you see it on open workouts and competition. Like you see the workout, and you might attack it differently from somebody else. You might know that you can push 9 out of 10 for the period of time, or you might need to hold back. So it's so much of a thinking ahead of the actual workout type of thing, and I love that. I think perhaps not everybody, in particular at the beginning, not everybody understands that, and they try to go all out. And Rob, you called me on that quite a few times. But
yeah, you're right, and it's I do think that there is a time to just let loose and go berserk, and just and to test yourself, because at the end of the day, it's all well and good like strategizing to a point where you say, right, I want to get to this end goal in, say, the most efficient way possible. But if you don't really know your body, which a lot of people don't, they don't really understand their true potential, that sometimes you need to just end yourself. And okay, cool, I can't do that movement because it destroys me. So, but I can end myself on something else and know I can use this as a recovery thing. So there is a time and a place, I think, to say end yourself. But I know you did like to do that quite often. But that's a good thing to you, because then what that's saying is you was always willing to put yourself out there to see how much you can make it hurt and if you could hold on. And that's a good thing, but then it's also understanding, cool, okay, I have a strategy for this. If the strategy goes to shit, what are you going to do? And then that's where you have your plan B. If you have, if you just completely end yourself and you're just holding on for dear life. So
there's a bit the difference. I feel it's a bit the difference between CrossFit as a physical activity and CrossFit as a sport, right? Like if you do CrossFit just because you want to keep the belly down and you want to keep fit in some ways, then it doesn't really matter. Like obviously be safe and be listen to your coach, etc. But it doesn't really matter what you do around it, as long as you get a workout in, as long as you get fitter on one of those variables. But then if you like CrossFit as a sport, then that's really what is fun about it, right? You test yourself, you see what are your limits, you play with it, you attack a workout, you look at movement, you're like, okay, actually, I can move through this fairly well, so I'm just gonna trust it and I'm just gonna go for it. And I find that's amazing. That's really what I like about it. Yeah,
that's kind of the opposite strategy.
That's really good.
I always like to substitute tactics for fitness. Like anytime I can just think about something and not be fit. That's that's great, mate. One thing I want to. Sorry, Rob. Go ahead.
Yeah, go. You go.
I was just going to ask Franco. In terms of the Grey Institute stuff, just for the listeners, give us a little bit of detail on what that is. And also I want to know how that's impacted your approach to physiotherapy, and you could compare and contrast the strategies for helping people.
Yeah, so that's so the Grey Institute is a educational and research institute in the United States, based in Michigan, in Adrian, and has been the Grey Institute has operated since the early or late 80s, I think. I think the first course that they delivered was in 1988, so it's been quite a while. And so physiotherapy itself, maybe listeners will benefit from a little bit of history. Physiotherapy itself, in particular in the late 1900s, was really focused on trying to find, and still is now sometimes, is really focused on trying to find a prescriptive way to deal with things, and a very standardized method of assessment and treatment. And this is because obviously we want to direct resources. So if you have 1,000 patients, then you can divide them into 20 groups and then deliver a prescribed type of treatment for those 20 groups. You obviously have a great, from a financial perspective, you have a great type of model there. The Grey Institute kind of challenged that over the years, pointing and focusing all its interest and its focus onto a much more patient-specific and patient-centered type of approach, both in terms of assessment and then management and treatment. So it is a biomechanical study, the one that you do when you do it's called GIFT course, the full course that I did, Gray Institute for Functional Transformation. And it is a biomechanics, all applied biomechanics, we call it, but really it does look at everything within the patient assessment and management. So it looks at the psychological side of things, it looks at the biomechanical side of things, it looks at the performance side of things, etc. So it's obviously it's a big commitment for any clinician. And the way that has impacted my physiotherapy. So as I said, physiotherapy kind of tries to give that standardized approach. And so even if I was more, as I said before, neurological rather than sport oriented at the beginning, I had that upbringing, right? So I was very standardized. I had the set of tests that I would do and the set of literally, for example, if you came to me for a shoulder pain, I had, 25 tests I would do to evaluate your shoulder joint. And then based on the outcome of those tests and based on what level of inflammation or what level of whatever, I would know what to prescribe you. Okay, so I would know what type of exercise to prescribe you. And literally at the beginning, perhaps also because I was a younger clinician, but I had almost a library of exercise in my head that I could go through with you, just pushing you through that pyramid, if we want, just to the top and see how much you could perform. The Gray Institute really challenged that because I ended up, at the end of the course, I ended up throwing away all those standard testing, which actually, funny enough, now we see more and more with research that they're not as reliable. But yes, all those standardized tests have been replaced with just asking my patient, okay, what can't you do? And actually show me how can you do it, if you can do it in some ways. And then working around it, just looking at the potential of that patient, the potential of that biomechanics, the potential of that joint, to see how to increase the functional outcome of that shoulder. So how to make that shoulder as moving as well as we can. So it almost makes it a lot, I'm a bit romantic in that, but I almost feel that it's a lot more artistic in terms of treatment, because you almost have a blank canvas. Your patient is a blank canvas, and then on your patient, with their relationship with your patient and with their movement, you build a tailored assessment and management plan. So that's why, for example, a lot of my patients ask me, oh, do you have some videos of these exercises that I can do, or do you have some drawings of them? I'm like, actually, no, because I never prescribe the same exercise with the exactly same angle, but it's always slightly different for all my patients. So I tend to have to take a video of me doing it or a video of them doing it. So it becomes really quite tailor specific to them and to what they need to do and to their stage at that moment.
Great. Do you think the outcomes are very different from doing the Gray Institute biomechanical stuff versus the standard physio exercises?
Well, I would have gone back otherwise, but yeah, I think it's different. You know what? I'm actually, to be completely honest with you, I think the more I get to work with high-level athletes, and don't get me wrong, when I talk about high-level athletes, I don't mean only elite. I also mean people that are really serious about their training, and they are willing to put in the work, they're willing to put in the effort that's surrounding that performance. And as I said, CrossFitters that do it as a sport because they enjoy the sport, they enjoy the movement, they enjoy the performance. And the more I work with these type of demographics, and more I realize that these type of management and assessment and management is really superior to the standardized one, to the one that I was doing before. Having said that, if you have the average office worker that doesn't do much and goes to the gym a little bit and doesn't really know what to do, I do also think there is a buffer zone there where actually the most important thing is to get people moving. And so once they get moving, even if you're not completely specific and ultra specialized in terms of the type of movement they do, they will get better to some point. But obviously you still have only a range of improvement there, and you need to push it a bit further with this functional type of approach if you want more performance. So there is a little bit of space for everything, but then definitely in sport medicine, this approach, the functional approach, is superior. And then the other thing that I always see, and this is very interesting, is the Gray Institute approach and the functional we can call it approach always works through what the patient already can do, rather than getting them to try exercises that are very complicated, very difficult, and they're difficult to control, they're difficult to implement, etc. So working on what the patient can already do, and also work towards a performance that the patient recognizes. For example, if I have a tennis player and I get them to do an exercise that looks like a tennis swing, then I increase the level of compliance for that exercise exponentially. So rather than getting them to do external rotation, bodybuilding style external rotation, which they don't understand why that is relevant for them, getting them to do something that is very similar to their actual outcome or desired outcome, that's a huge psychological boost and a huge boost in terms of compliance, and is a great addition.
As well, right? It actually carries over. I think we spoke about this in our functional, what is functional training episode, in terms of when you're designing an exercise, having it actually similar to what you're trying to improve. And I was doing a video session with a client's brother who's actually in the England cricket development squad, and he's at Loughborough Uni, and was saying how the strength and conditioning stuff, he did it and he sort of looked better and was stronger in the gym, but he just didn't feel like it carried over to his cricket at all, and he's trying to get a little bit faster as a bowler. And just had him doing some core exercises that mimicked his run-up and his delivery in bowling. And he's like, yeah, this is exactly what it feels like to bowl, and I can see very clearly how this would carry over to my sport, rather than doing some like generic abs, like doing sit-ups so that your abs might look a little bit better when your top's off. But actually, he's a sportsman and he's trying to get better at cricket. So he wants to do exercises that will actually improve his sporting performance. So it's not just from a compliance perspective where they're like, okay, I can see where this is going. It's actually from a results perspective. This will make me better at what I want to do. And I think one of the reasons why people at WIT love going to see you is because you know where they're going. So you know their shoulder hurts when they're doing kipping pull-ups. So the exercises you give will lead to kipping pull-ups, and they buy into the fact that that's actually the outcome. Whereas, if, like you say, if they're doing some banded external rotations, like this doesn't really feel like it's close to where I want to end up, and there's that disconnect between what I'm doing and where I want to go, which is a lot harder to buy into, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and also. I think perhaps this is not. I would go a little bit off the tangent there, but because I work, so my professional life is divided into between clinical and academic. So I work quite a lot at university, and I teach neuroscience and clinical neurology. And from a neuroscientific perspective, I can't even begin to start saying the implication, the anatomical and physiological background for our therapies to be function specific, because there is so much more to it. It's not only about, as you say, the patient seeing the benefit of it, but also the carryover. But the reason why there is that carryover and the reason why there are those benefits is because there is such a huge support for an authentic or a functionally authentic style of approach in physiotherapy and movement therapies, because of how we are made, how our body works, how our brain works in terms of motor control, how our muscles and fascia works in terms of motor control, etc. So, the actual physiological background of that, the evidence-based background of that type of therapy is huge, is so big. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Do you see that filtering through into standard physiotherapy anytime soon?
Yeah, so I think there is more and more. As I said, so I work at a osteopathic university, and obviously osteopathy is a bit different from physiotherapy, in particular in the education. Like I always say to my patient when they ask me the difference between the two, I always say, well, to be honest with you, if you take an osteopath and a physiotherapist, you put them in the same working environment for 20 years. By the end of the 20th years, they probably work fairly similarly, just because as professional you adapt to where you are, and in terms of courses and other stuff postgraduate, the professions are not that dissimilar nowadays. But in terms of education, there is still quite a lot of differences. Like my students, they do still a lot of hands-on work in their bachelor degree, while physiotherapist perhaps is a little bit less hands-on and a little bit more prescriptive still, a little bit more exercise prescription. But in terms of the university where I work, we definitely are moving towards a more functional type of understanding, a more functional type of approach. I have some students, we have around between 60 and 100 students per year, and I have some students actually undertaking some of the AFS of the Gray Institute. AFS stands for Applied Functional Science. Some of the AFS modules, even while they're doing their bachelor. So it is getting there, and more and more I think students they see the evidence for it, and so they want to educate themselves into that. And there is still quite a lot of I would say quite a lot of friction with some of the tutors, some of the professors, etc., just because their background is different, and there is a little bit in the profession. Obviously, as always, there is a bit of continuation bias, right? If you worked in a certain way for 15 years and you perhaps don't have the greatest, without judging anybody, but you don't have the greatest reflective practice and critical practice over your professional life, then you're going to keep on working the way you've been working. So there is that definitely part of the education, but we are also moving forward quite a lot. So that's definitely yes. Yeah.
I think definitely that will be, like, as you say about it's the older generation essentially, and as I think the younger generation are coming in, where the younger generation seem to be a little bit more open-minded into looking into other areas and experimenting. I think the loss that, say, a more senior person might have when then experimenting into a different area, even though it probably is really beneficial to them, they probably see it as a bigger detriment to their business, say, or the way they do things. So it's like, it's like better the stranger you know, isn't it? Like if you know that something kind of works and you drill that in, then it's going to be really hard for you to start looking into something else. Whereas I'd say now you've got so many more students, and where the internet has got so much information now, and people like yourself, you're a young tutor who trains himself, who does all these things. So he's not just reading out of a textbook and telling someone, right, this is what the shoulder does when you're doing a pull-up. You know what it does in the textbook, you know what happens in real life application, and you also see what happens when you push your shoulder, say, to its extremes, because you've watched that or you've experienced it through your own injuries and stuff like that. And I think having these own experiences is where it's massively different, because most people, if you're just reading out of a textbook, that's just, it's the same as when it comes to like PT. As long as if you can sympathize with a client and you've been through your own journey, they're going to massively relate to you so much more and kind of buy into what you're saying, rather than just you. If you're like someone that's always been lean and you're saying all you need to do is eat less food, it's like, it's a little bit more than just eat less food, because there's a whole different psychological side to it that you don't necessarily, not that you don't understand, so you're wrong, but what they're saying is you might not understand the struggles that they're going through. So it's I think, and that's where as I say, where the younger generation stuff is coming up, and you've got so many different people experiencing, and with sports like CrossFit, which we're going to touch into, but where some might say has caused some injuries, say, and that is but had it at the same time, because bodybuilding causes loads of injuries, powerlifting causes loads of injuries. They all do it, but I think because of the exposure that the body gives, the exposure that CrossFit gives to the body is so vast, a lot of the time people want to run before they can walk, which we've all, as a coach for side, as someone like yourself, and even as athletes ourselves, is that we know we want to get to that, say, ring muscle up as soon as possible. So we're going to just get on the rings and just try and get ourselves up probably at the start. And then we realize, okay, that might not be the best way going forward. And it probably takes a little bit of an injury or a niggle that then says, actually, we should probably stop. And I think I know Ash touched on this before, but in your perspective, when does a niggle turn into an injury? So at what point do you see it happening, the change?
Yeah, so first of all, if I give you a little bit my insight on the sport, as you were saying, I think you're absolutely right. Like CrossFit does ask to the body a lot of variability and a lot of adaptability, perhaps more than other sports. And at the same time, actually I would say more than other sports. And actually at the same time, it also has quite a lot of technical requirements. So, athletes that are interested in, or members that are interested in the sport of CrossFit, they will always tend to push towards that performance, towards that type of movement, etc. And on doing so, obviously, I always say to my patients that CrossFit doesn't allow any of your compensations or any of your tightness, etc., to hide as much as other sports. Like if I am a runner and I'm not very mobile on the side-to-side motion of my hips, I can probably get around with it because I modify a little bit my running and I start using other muscles or I start doing different things. I might not be as efficient, but I might be able to carry on for 30 years without any actual major injury. With CrossFit, where I might have running, but I also have some side-to-side movement because I am required or I'm asked to do some box jumps, then I might actually expose that, and that is when I start feeling my hips particularly tight and particularly painful or something. Now, distinguishing that type of tightness and pain from an injury is definitely not easy because I would say that obviously time, we all push ourselves, so we all have a little bit of a few tightness and niggles, etc. So time will give you some insights. So if something goes away or you adapt quickly to it, it might be more likely to be a functional problem of adaptation and you'll get around it. But obviously, if it sticks around for quite a long time and you try it with some stretching, with some exercises that should have made it better, then obviously this becomes more than just an ego and becomes something that you need to play around with. You need to actually address, right? When you are at that point, I always say, and is always a bit tricky because you don't want to tell people to overthink injury or overthink pain, etc. But on the same time, we do want to take charge of this type of problems early on. And the reason why we want to do that, well, there are several reasons. One is the easy one to understand, which is obviously if that is actually something a bit inflamed or something a little bit injured, then you want to address it before it becomes something else, right? Before it gets worse. But then the other thing that is very important and sometimes is a bit counterintuitive is that actually we know now from a lot of research in the area, etc., that this pain itself is not only a symptom now, but we actually consider pain as a problem. Okay, so if you have pain and if you work through it, but it keeps staying there because you haven't been able to work around it, etc., over and over again for a long period of time, that is when pain itself can become the problem. And our body, our brain, our nervous system is made to make any type of painful experience loud, right? Because we want to protect our body from it. So we are not made to actually disregard pain. We are made to, everything that we look in terms of neuroanatomy and neurophysiology is made to make that pain system really loud. So pain itself is self-maintaining, and we definitely need to try to break any type of vicious circle within that self-maintenance of pain early on. So both avoiding further injury and avoiding the pain to stay there for a long time are definitely very important reasons to address any type of niggles, as we were saying, or any type of injuries earlier on. Obviously,
as I said before, I don't want to make it sound like you have a little bit of neck tightness, you should definitely run to see a physio or run to see a doctor. But on the same time, you don't want to disregard stuff that stays there for longer than you would expect, and always ask, obviously, to people that have more experience than you, like your coaches, etc., what they would expect. Is this something that they've seen before? Is there something you can do about it? You can try. Otherwise, obviously, you need to take it further. Yeah.
You know what? So you saying that just really helped, made me think back to when I actually saw you, and it's like, so when I done my left lower back in, basically, so around like my SI joint and stuff, I remember being in serious pain and not being able to essentially move. Then, so obviously this is now going on like a year or so later, and then it happened again as essentially my body's response, which is what you said to me. So doing some deficit deadlifts and going through the movement and feeling completely fine, and then doing a lift and then having to drop the weight, literally fall over to the side and cannot move. And then within a week, I'm then back to normal again. And I remember coming to see you, and it was because you were out in Miami at the time, and Wadapalooza. And in that time, I managed to do some light deadlifts again. So I was just doing 6 kilo deadlifts and with some tempo. And I remember the one thing you said to me is saying like, you would not have healed that quickly if it was anything bad. So a lot of time it's your remembering of pain and what that old
Absolutely.
pain was, and your body's response to it saying, fuck, bro, put the brakes on, don't do this again. Even though I was fine. So then, even though what I was doing was probably okay, it was going into a deteriorating state, and my body was probably aware of that state that I was going towards, and it didn't want me to hurt myself again. So it put the brakes on in a way that it already knew, which goes, cool, okay, I know he hates the pain of his left SI joint in that area, and I can just flare that up, and he's going to stop completely. So I say your body's always trying to find homeostasis, right, and always trying to
Absolutely.
find where it feels comfortable. But the whole thing of training is pushing yourself out of homeostasis and finding new adaptations, so you have a new homeostasis, you have a new level of ability of the body. So that's the whole idea. So it's when you overreach and go beyond, which at times is a good thing, but if it's not done under, say, structure and stuff like that, or say under, say, a advised method, then you can probably end up hurting yourself. And I think this is where I was just, as you was thinking, and you were just saying about certain bits, I was thinking about the return of it when everyone gets back to the gym. And I'm just thinking about now when everyone's been, so a lot of people don't have barbells at the moment, so they're using their dumbbells and kettlebells, which are absolutely amazing for accessory stuff and stability and all that shit. But when people go back to the barbell and they're going to try and snatch straight away, I'd like to hear your opinion on this, but I can picture a lot of people's shoulders, hips and stuff flaring up massively. Not necessarily because they were doing anything wrong, but because of the change of stimulus, and their body's not remembering it so frequently because of how they were doing it, say, day in and day out. Now they haven't done it for, say, potentially, say, 9+ weeks. Then wonder what their body's going to, is our listeners going to find any problems here? Do you think there's going to be any inflammation that's going to come from this?
Can I jump in quickly? So I think, you make a really good point there, Rob, about what I almost refer to as like the ghost of an injury. So if somebody's had an injury in the past, it lives on in their nervous system beyond damage to the tissue. So if you did do something terrible to your lower back, you wouldn't have been deadlifting in a week, but it's almost like reminding yourself of a bad memory. Like, say you watched a horror movie and you've forgotten about it, but then you see something like the mask of the guy in Nightmare on Elm Street or whatever, something like that, and then it brings it back and you get the feeling again. The same thing happens with injuries. And there's an awesome story, I'll probably butcher the details, but it's some guy in Australia walking in the bush, and basically he scratches his ankle on a bramble or something, and it's a bit painful, but doesn't pay any attention to it. And it turns out they actually got bitten by a highly venomous snake and goes into anaphylactic shock, gets taken to the hospital. Like, it's excruciating to go through that experience, but luckily they get the antivenom and he survives. Then I don't know the exact time duration, but it's literally like 17 or 18 years later, he's walking through the bush again, and he actually scratches his ankle on a bramble. It's not a snake bite, and he goes into anaphylactic shock because it was the same point on the body, and it was such an intense experience that his brain was hypersensitive against that specific stimulus. So even though there was nothing bad, his body was trying to protect him by basically saying, I need to freak out now because I know this is super serious and dangerous. And it's manifested through himself without any actual problem. And so how that relates to injuries is you can have pain in the absence of injury, and you can have injury with the absence of pain. And in terms of bringing somebody back to function, a huge part of it is just reconditioning the nervous system to give it the confidence that you can do a movement without negative impact. So if we relate this to your deadlift and people going back to the gym, say they've had an injury or you've had an injury from doing a specific deadlift, we need to sort of tread carefully in how much exposure you get to the similar stimulus to build that trust again. So your body's like, actually, I can do a deficit deadlift. Obviously, what you did that session was a little bit too much too soon, but by going into similar positions with appropriate intensity, you're giving, so say like if we go back to that guy in Australia, you could like tickle his ankle maybe in that spot. You know what I mean? Like you've got to dose it up at a level where
it sounds funny, but that's actually what we might actually do. That guy is Lorimer Mosley, and he's one of the pain researchers of the NOI Group Neuroorthopedic Institute of Australia, and that's indeed is one of the stories that he uses to describe painful memories and that type of reaction. So it's spot on. I think you're right, and actually, even just getting we can even do some brushing techniques and stuff in clinic for that particular desensitization, we call it, of the nervous system. But this story, for example, shows you what I was saying before about the fact that your nervous system and your brain are made for sticking to the pain information and protect you over time. I always say to my students, and this is a bit speculation, but if you think about our evolution span, like we stopped really evolving or changing our anatomy, etc., quite a lot of few thousands of years ago. And from a functional requirement, from an evolutionary requirement, if you think about the life expectancy back then and the recovery of injury needed back then is very different from what we have now. We didn't have surgery back then. Your life expectancy was mid-20s, 30s, right? And if you had an injury, it was likely to be costing your life, right? So you had to really be over-focused. Your entire nervous system is supposed to be so focused on it so that you either die because of the injury and you haven't been able to run fast enough, or you die with the injury because you were clever enough that you were able to protect it, right? So the recovery from it are not part of our evolutionary background, let's say, or evolutionary wiring. So that's very important, because when you are training athletes that come back, that return to play from an injury, when I'm treating somebody or prescribing somebody exercise, etc., I am working through that third possibility, and it is a bit of a cheat to the system, right? I am cheating the system, trying to get through that conditioning, and I need to use all the psychological boost, all the management, etc., that I can to improve that outcome and to make that outcome possible. But that's a very, very good point. Is very important. Painful memories are very, very important, and the assessment of it. Actually, the memories of pain are very important. The assessment of it is, as you said before, Rob, very important. On that, if I can make a point, which I think is quite important for the listeners, and I don't want to angry anybody that might have that obviously perhaps find benefit from a more structural type of approaches, etc. But can you see, for example, with your example, Rob, how almost natural could have been for somebody like myself go through, okay, you know what, your sacroiliac joint is a bit stiff, fair enough, there is muscle reaction to the pain. It's a bit stiff, so it means that the sacroiliac joint is out of position or is in a weird posture. Let's say that joint itself is locked in a position, is rotated, is twisted. And all this terminology and that type of explanation might have made sense, but actually denotates a structural correlate to that pain, which actually we know from an evidence-based perspective, we know from a functional outcome we want to achieve, is not actually correct and is not supported. So instead of working through that dynamic idea of, oh, I need to make things working better, I need to make my patient more confident within that movement. And in your case, obviously you're a coach, so it was an easy job for me, but explaining you what is going on and how to manage it, how to work around something like that, if we represent, will give you a lot more. It means empowering the patient, empowering the athlete a lot more, rather than getting you back into my clinic, into my plinth every week and manipulate your SIJ and charging you 100 quid for it. Is easy money for me. And, I make you almost dependent to that type of approach.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think we've touched on this before. We touched on it with the episode with Liam. We've touched on it in our own things. It's like the thing of education. And I think educating the client, individual, patient, whoever, into one, what's kind of gone wrong, and or say what's causing the issue, and then how the journey looks of how to get out of it. Because I think a lot of people they understand they're willing to put their bodies into situations where they may get injured because they're wanting to, say, perform. They do things above and beyond because they want to get better. And as long as they know that where their limits are and they're understanding how they can progress through that, and if they do get injured, like with someone like yourself, and they come to someone like yourself, that they have the trust and faith in you that you're not going to say to them, right, go and do some clams in the corner and stuff like that. You're going to say, right, okay, do you know what? You now need to do this, this, and this. This is going to help you get to, say, deadlifting from blocks, and then you're going to be able to deadlift from the floor again, confident, and stuff like that. And so all you've done is, say, reduce your range of motion, say, as an example, and then you say, right, even though they probably didn't need to reduce their range of motion, you're giving them that mini win along the way, that then you say, right, your next step is the floor. And because you've said it, this is the power of like a coach, a physio, and all that. A lot of people trust what you say because that's your profession. Just like if you go into their professions and you ask them about something, you should trust what they're saying. That's the only point of call. Well, I think with the internet, there is so many coaches and so many points of opinion, say, that sometimes it can get a bit blurred. So that's why I definitely feel as long as you find, say, the right person, like the right physio, if you have the opportunity to find a great physio where you build a good relationship with and so forth. Like I said, with you and me, it's like since I've been seeing you, I've come to you with all sorts of little niggles here and there. But the amount of say clients and members and stuff that we've all, myself and others, have sent to you not because say that you are one of the best around that I've been to, but it's also because of that empathy and that answer. Not to blow your trumpet too much, but it's the fact that you understand that we don't want to go and get into a corner and do some, as I say, external rotations or some clients. We want to get back to moving, but if we can't get back to moving right now, how long realistically is it going to take to get there, and what mini wins going to get along the way? That means I don't need to do these silly physio exercises that people I think about.
And I think as on that, first of all, my job is finished here. I can go. I think you're right, and I think there are a couple of points perhaps that can help the listener on that. The first of all, as you say, education is very important. So when you do go to see a physio or an osteopath or a chiropractor or a movement specialist or clinician whatsoever, that is gonna take care of you and of your injury, etc., for a period of time. Always really look for somebody that is able to provide you with a management timeline and with a program, rather than just, these are your 3 exercises. and okay, when am I going to do them? How long do I need to try this for, or forever? You need to have an actual plan, in particular if you have an athlete in front of you, a plan for something that you want to see at some point. Otherwise you need to change the strategy, etc. So that management is very, very important. But I also wanted to say, just because on what I said before sounds like the structural approach is completely not useful, I also think it depends on what type of clinical management you're looking for, really. Because if you are coming to me with an injury, I haven't seen you before, then definitely I'm going to go through that management plan. Definitely we're going to look at the progression and talk to the coaches, etc. But then if you instead, and I have a few athletes that come to me regularly, for example, for treatment, and they perhaps come to me either with an injury or with no injuries, with some niggles every now and then. They come to me more with how their training has felt over the last month. Then that allows me, rather than focusing on something that is not behaving as we would like for performance and we need to tweak, that allows me to focus on a general overview of their mobility and stability and what they might do to improve their performance, and perhaps even from a structural standpoint, I might do some manipulative therapy and some more hands-on osteopathy sometimes to shortcut a bit those changes that we want to see within their performance and within the training. So I do still think, like, you talk to a lot of games competing CrossFitters, etc., and most of them do have a go-to osteopath or a go-to chiropractor or physiotherapist that they see even weekly, just to get to the edge of that performance, right? So I'm not saying that is not relevant at all and that there is no space for that. I'm just saying when you actually are facing an injury, and perhaps is a recurring injury, and perhaps is associated, as you said before, with some memory of the pain, etc., then things need to become a lot more they need to become a lot more holistic, a lot more complex, and a lot more functional, let's say, right? But then there is also space for the structural approach sometimes, in particular in sport medicine, I think. Nice. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does, and it's like so. So I want to kind of lead on to when I mentioned members, when we go back into, say, our normality of training, because I think that what you just said there, it kind of leads nicely onto that, where a lot of, say, athletes and stuff like that, they say come to someone like yourself for essentially what is like a service, essentially like a car service, you're, rather than necessarily always being broken, they're coming to see you to just as that management thing, actually, you're kind of refining their system in a way where, okay, you're going to be in the best shape possible to carry on with your training, and hopefully no possible niggles are going to lead anywhere. So you're kind of like identifying these things. As you say, you talk to the individual. So now everyone has, say, been out of the gym and may not have access to barbells and so forth. Do you reckon there's going to be a bit of a boost for your business? Not in a other thing, but do you reckon there's going to be a lot more people suddenly coming up with maybe some information or some slight niggles? And what can our listeners do to not necessarily not come to you, but to understand if it is just a bit of wear and tear that need to get back into? Because I know that's the thing. You're looking out for people's well-being here. So I want to try and give the listeners something they can take away from when they return.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think, first of all, it is probably, hopefully not, right? Hopefully that's the bottom line. Hopefully there is no injury while they are home training if they do it safely. And again, it really, unfortunately, the answer, as most of the time, is it depends. Really, it depends on what they've been doing while they were at home, how much have they trained, and what does being at home means for them as well. Because a lot of CrossFitters obviously have a 9-to-5 job, and perhaps they are working from home, so they are perhaps a little bit more static, sitting more, less meetings, so less getting up and moving around. And so I think it really depends who you are and what have you done, and that's an important one. And if you haven't gone through any injury, there is no reason for you to fear any inflammatory state or any, as you mentioned, tear or anything like that. Hopefully. But a little bit like what we were saying the other day with Ash when we did the Q&A on running injury and people that, for example, have picked up more running over the last few weeks because of the lockdown. And I think we should always be very careful about the transition that our body needs to go through. So in a micro context of a day, of a runner, I give the example of if you run, if you are on the weekend, you get up, you have breakfast, you move around a bit, you play with your kids, and then you go for a run. You're going for a run after that your body has moved around, has gone in through different range, that you've done a bit of warm up, hopefully, or not, you still have that adaptability on you. If you go to the office, get up, go to the office, sit for 10 hours, and then you go for a run in the evening, and you don't do any appropriate transitional warm up, you are going to go running chair shaped. So you are running within that type of body, right? So it's a very different situation. Now, if you take that and expand it throughout the lockdown, this means that while before you would have gone to the gym and after an appropriate warm up with your coaches, etc., you would have snatched with the body that has come from 9, 10 months through 2 years of adaptation and working through it. Now instead, obviously, you go and you're going to try to Olympic lifting or do whatever after, a month, 2 months of sitting down a lot more and of doing a lot less. And so you do really need to take care for a few days, I would say, of that transition. Okay. So, there will be, unfortunately, a lot of egos left at the door, hopefully, because you don't want really to go back to what you were doing before, but you need to take care of it. And you need to take it easy. You need to listen to your body, listen to your coaches, and hopefully the coaches themselves will really be aware of that and will really be, for example, I'm expecting that if we go back to weight, the first week of going back won't be testing week. Right?
No,
that's the idea, right? So if it was, there would be a coach mistake, there would be Gus's mistake on thinking, okay, people can max out the first week after they've been indoor for 2 months, right? So obviously, I absolutely know Gus wouldn't do that, and the idea is we will need a few weeks of transition to get back into that into the state before lockdown, let's say, into our body before lockdown.
What's good is, I guess, we're in particular using that, since we all know that we're doing like the weightlifting classes now, even if you haven't got a barbell, like with a broomstick, so your movement patterns are still there, because a lot of the time when people say are going to come back, as you say, the egos need to be left at the door, because they can't expect to go back lifting their 100 kilo snatch at a PB just before lockdown. They need to go back with the mindset of saying, cool, let me build back to that, and let's start from maybe 50%, and let's start from there. Does it feel good? How does it move? Your jumps will be a lot quicker and a lot more sustained and then last, rather than going, right, I still have a 100 kilo snatch, I'm going to snatch 80 kilos, where that's pretty hard, say, for that individual. And it's like, maybe if you decide at 50, you get to 100, say, in 2 weeks. Whereas if you go, right, I'm going to go back and go at 80, you'll probably then get some niggles and inflammation. So that 2 weeks turns into 4 weeks. Then you're recovering from, say, an unnecessary niggle. So I think the ego is going to be the big thing that needs to be focused on for most people coming back. And I think everyone that has been, say, training from home most of the time has had some intensity. So I think people are going to be able to push themselves, which is great. Seeing the WIT classes, the Zoom classes have been great. Watching the effort of everyone is amazing. And I think when we come back, that's going to help. I think most CrossFit boxes that are doing these virtual boxes, it's the community still there and stuff like that. And as you said, the mental side of things is so important that, it's the physical stuff is, but if you're not mentally checked in, it's gonna pay later issues later on.
And at the same time, I think, exactly as you say, it does depend, right? Because if there are a lot of my patients, there are a lot of members that you also know, and probably your athletes that do have quite a lot of equipment, and so they are doing a fair amount of training, a fair amount of training to a level that is going to transition anyway to that performance. So it really does depend on the single person. So I think in terms of take home tips for the listeners that are going to go back to the box, etc., is also not to look at other people, because there might be somebody next to you who had an Olympic bar in their garden and who kept on repping PB snatches all week, and so they will definitely be a lot more primed than you into take that type of load. So do listen to your body, ask to the coaches, and take care of that transition. Take care of the transition from being locked in to actually go back to the full experience as before. And as you were saying, you were mentioning the recovery as well. The recovery is so important, right? And we all say, oh yeah, that this lockdown is great because we sleep a lot. You can eat. Well, you can decide what you're eating, and you have the time perhaps to make it, etc. But the reality is that we know from a mental toll perspective, being locked down has been a huge toll for a lot of people, right? Has been, and this is a lot of stress, even if you don't maybe realize it, if you're not the type of person that can listen to that and that really maybe manifest that, it does take quite a lot out of us, and it is an important part of our recovery. So as you say, it is a mental thing as well. So give yourself time, don't rush into it, and don't be too hard on yourself. Like, just take it easy, take a lot more rest than you normally do. Physically as well, right? If you need to sweat because you want to sweat it, just go for a run or get on the rower or whatever. But perhaps stay away from the more technical challenges until you have dealt with that type of transition.
Nice. That's nicely put, actually. That's that thing of still work hard. We're not saying to not work hard, but maybe don't go and do the ring muscle up into snatch, into this. Maybe that might be for a couple of weeks' time, and maybe at this very moment, maybe do your burpees over row, like one of the open workouts, real simple ones, and row and some burpees. That'll get your heart up, that'll get you going, and you'll feel a lot better for it as well, because you'll be able to go back to the gym the next day. So again, you're adding blocks to that thing of that positivity, and you're getting that good response. And I think when the mental side of this, I think is why one of the reasons they've said, right, unlimited exercise on the new lockdown thing, and they said that's a bit of a weird one, but as in still, I think they've understood the thing of people. We're going to have such a big mental health problem from this, probably more than the actual physical thing. If there's been loads of issues and stuff like that, but it's like the mental stuff won't show for a while. And I think where there's already people that were already on the brink are probably gone even further, and now they're feeling a lot more scared to say go out and stuff. So then, and they're not getting that vitamin D. They're not, because we've had great weather in London. We've had an absolute touch. So, we've had the opportunity to really refresh our bodies and our minds. But if people then start to go into a bit of a negative state, that's then going to play a huge part when it comes to their movement. And I think, and because, as it all covers in, when we talk about in one of the functional continuum thing, where you've got performance, aesthetics and health, is in that they all blend so nicely together, whether it's training, nutrition, mindset, whatever it is, you need all three to be a whole athlete. And that was something that, I think as a listener, whether you're a coach or a athlete themselves, like an everyday athlete, make sure that check your ego at the door and really think about how you're going to get back to your positive movement and how you can really get back into back into the swing of things, shall we say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And as you say, like, try to take it positive. Like, I know it's difficult, but even if you force almost a little bit that positivity, rather than being frustrated because you can't do what you were doing before, if you think, okay, yes, I can see this as the glass half empty and think, okay, I can't do what I was doing before, or I can get there and be like, okay, yes, I'm back at the gym. I can get the sweat on, as you were saying before. I can, I can perform still to a level that I feel the endorphins and I feel that good effect on me. That's obviously the glass half full
approach. Exactly, not half empty. And I think, I think it's going to be I think this is such an opportunity of a time. I think we've mentioned in previous ones, but this moment right now is such an opportunity for self-development, whether it's in whatever it is, in business, growth, movement, whatever, because we've never had this type of time away to be able to really reflect on yourself and then think about, how are we going to grow? Because you don't even need an end to lockdown date in mind, because you should be thinking about day by day and maybe week by week, not thinking, once lockdown's done, I can then go into this. And it's like, you need to be thinking about what you can start winning at now. And I think I'm extremely grateful for that. Because I've had so much time with Chloe, Hannah. I've done plenty of home DIY stuff, which is extremely strenuous on the body. I found that thanks to the
it makes us feel all like we are absolutely inadequate.
I tell you what, it's such a cool. It is such a good opportunity. Obviously, it's sad about how obviously some people are, not having the best times or unfortunately dying and stuff. But it's for a lot of us, you cannot complain, and you need to take this as that glass half full approach. And mate, there's if you don't mind, we'd like to get you back on for another podcast, because there's some areas that I think we could really dive deep into here, and especially when it comes to like movement specific stuff, and then also maybe what some of the listeners be able to kind of think about when they get back into the gym. But I think, is there anything else, Ash, that you wanted to touch on?
We definitely want to do a part 2, because there's a lot of things that me and Franco would like to
I love
discuss.
that,
I think that's going to be really good, because I think we want to really dive deep into a lot of that stuff, and I think the members will be able to. I think that'll be real eye-opening stuff. But I think this was a nice introduction to who Franco is, and kind of a bit of a buy-in, shall we say, if you don't know who he is, and get the respect for him. So, Franco, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
Really, really cool.
Where can people find out more about you, mate? Let's get that out.
I'm not as probably as active as you on Instagram, but I do post a few things every now and then, so that's probably where to go. And otherwise, like if you do need to chat with me in terms of an injury or something like that, even without commitment and something like this, my clinic is called True Motion, and so truemotionclinic.co.uk is the website, and they can find all the information there.
Cool. We'll put the link in the description below so people can easily get access to that. And is your Instagram the same, just at True Motion?
True Motion UK, yeah.
True Motion UK, brilliant. So, mate, thank you very much for today. And,
thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
For the next podcast with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot for listening. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. As always, if you like to leave us a review, we'd really appreciate it on iTunes. Really help us get build up the podcast chart, shall we say, and try and get the message out there. So thanks a lot, guys, for listening, and we'll catch you guys next week.